Okay, hello and welcome back to Social Work 375. This is chapter 1, and we're going to do just a little bit of a mini lecture on the content of the first chapter. And just for your information, these are the slides that came with your textbook, and so we'll be following pretty closely to the book, but on occasion I'll bring in outside sites and information for you and may refer to those here in the in the PowerPoint. So chapter 1 is all about making an argument for why you should be taking this class and why you as a social worker should know about research. So they talk about the 4 key reasons for why you would want to know about research. What's the purpose? Why do we use research? And the 4 definitions they give in your text are describing, defining, measuring, and evaluating. Describing has to do with just describing a population. What are the cancer rates in Alaska? What are the common mental health conditions of a particular group? So collecting information to describe a population, and you can see how that would likely be really useful. Sometimes it's about defining a problem, defining the scope of an issue, giving meaning to a particular circumstance. So an example of this might be, what does it mean to be depressed? What is our definition of depression, and how will we incorporate that in the research that we're doing? Is it that you check certain boxes on the DSM, or that you meet a certain criteria for being depressed? It's also about measuring, right? Rates, percentages, levels. What are the risks? Those kinds of things. And also evaluating how well is something working. And likely, as a baccalaureate social worker, evaluating is a process that you'll be involved in producing evaluation materials, in the sense that you'll be asked, is your program working? And your funders will want to see evidence, either that your program's working or that it's not working. So research, it can be key in evaluating program effectiveness. So you're likely familiar with lots of research. In fact, you've probably done lots of research, both for your job and certainly for your school career. You're familiar with library research, and we talked the other day in our first discussion board about how you access peer-reviewed literature through the university library. Marketing research, that's where you inquire about people's interests. You want to know what they want and what they don't want, what people are interested in market-wise. You may see this or I've read about this in the media. There's political research, what views are politically. You probably hear this quoted in the news often, or who people plan to vote for is a common part of political research. And then there's media research, and this is when certain groups collect information to get a sense of how people feel about a particular issue. You may see media research if you ever go to the CNN website or a news website and they ask you your views on something. So those are some different areas of research that you might be familiar with, or maybe not. So another area regard to research that's important to social work that we'll talk quite a bit about this semester is the role that research has in the development of theory. And let me give you an example of this. How many of you have heard of attachment theory? Attachment theory says that our early relationships, those relationships we have with our primary caregivers, are important to our mental health and well-being throughout the rest of our life. And this is a theory. It's a belief. But it's a theory and a belief that's been proven through research. And so one of the ways that the ideas about attachment that were first formed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, one of the ways that this theory was developed was through the testing. And we'll look at some examples of how attachment theory was tested. So in attachment theory, the researchers wanted to prove that this early relationship was important, and so they developed this research method they called the strained situation, which is what you're seeing in the picture below. And in this method, they worked with all different kinds of parents, primary moms, but of different socioeconomic and racial groups, and they tested what happened when those moms walked away from those children, all about the same age. And then they followed those children for a number of years and measured their mental health and well-being and their connection with their parents, their level of bonding. And they found that the strange situation test could predict levels of attachment. And this was used to verify and prove that the attachment theory, or at least validate that attachment theory is a useful way to think about the importance of early childhood relationships. So in that way, research is used often to develop theory, to test whether or not theory makes sense, to test whether or not theory approaches all of the particular aspects. And for example, in the attachment theory we just talked about, first they tried the strange situation testing in the US, but they've since tested it in multiple different cultures and found that those same attachment styles hold up across a variety of cultures. So they've tested it for comprehensiveness. They've obviously designed a way to test the theory. And then how does it fit with other theories? How does it fit with other understandings? Research can tell you that. And then how is that important to social work practice? And again, attachment theory is an excellent example of that, because attachment theory is all about the importance of early relationships, and social workers use that model all of the time to work with parents, to teach families, to help families that are struggling to develop better bonds based on the ideas of attachment theory. So part of the research idea and is not just that we're talking about what we think, right? Maybe logic or what you've learned from your family or just through observation tells you that it's probably pretty important that children form relationships with their primary caregivers. And that's observation and practice wisdom. It's not the same thing as scientific research. So the idea that then you can design something like this strange situation and apply rigorous methods that are systematic, give you more confidence to say, yes, this is really happening and not just a chance observation or my own belief system. And the scientific method contributes to that systematic rigor that goes with research. This process also allows us to make generalizations. If we apply a certain test, a certain research method that's rigorous across many different populations, then we can say with some confidence that whether or not you're dealing with an infant in Uganda or an infant in New York City, that this idea applies across different groups. The emphasis is on empirical evidence, and what that means, empirical means numbers, right? Independently or as unbiased as possible collected data. So maybe information that you learned through an interview, information that you've learned from practice, good information, but that's not considered empirical. Scientific research has a commitment to neutrality, right? And there's some discussion that we'll have later on in the semester about whether or not that's possible, but there's an effort, a very vigorous effort to try to be as neutral as possible, to not let your values and beliefs or ideas and concepts influence the research outcome. And that's harder to do in certain study designs than it is in others. And again, that's a discussion where there's lots of different thoughts, and we'll get into that some throughout the semester. There's also unique ethical principles, and we'll talk a lot this semester about research ethics and participation recruitment and what your concerns are. They're similar in a lot of ways to the same ethical guidelines that guide you as a practitioner, and there's some aspects of that that are unique, specific to research, and as I said, we'll touch on those later in the semester. So as social workers, we are both potentially consumers of research as well as potentially producers of research. So when we consume research, it means that we take someone else's careful collection of data and we look at it and critically think about it, and we try to determine how it may or may not apply to the individuals, groups, or communities that we work with. So as a consumer of research, one of the things that you're need to be able to do is understand the research study. What was the design? How valid is it? Just because something is published or printed doesn't mean that the information or data collection process was good. You need to be able to evaluate that for yourself. You also need to know how to apply the studies to practice. What are the practical implications, and specifically what are those practical implications for your setting? What's the level of generalizability of a study versus the level that's specific to the population that the study researched. And all of these relate to critical thinking skills, thinking about the different nuances of your community, your practice, the study's nuances, and how they may or may not interact. And like I talked about before, we're also, as social workers, we're producers of research, meaning both formal and informal research is a part of what we do. When you want to learn about a particular issue that your client is working with, when you want to collect information to write a grant, when you are asked to evaluate your program, we as social workers then become producers. And so in this, you need to be aware of what the steps are in a research process, the different ways that you can conduct research. You need to be mindful and educated on ethics. You need to be thoughtful about where you collect your data in terms of representing diversity and picking research topics that promote social justice as is aligned with our profession. You need to be able to look at the components of quality research and do quality research within the limitations. And you need to think about the way that research is designed and how that meets or doesn't meet the needs of your research question. And all of this we'll talk at great length about later in the semester and later chapters. So also this semester, as a part of learning to be producers of research, we're going to learn about ways you construct surveys and other kinds of instruments that collect data. We're going to look at how you structure evaluation and effectiveness of interventions. You're going to learn the tools to collect and analyze both qualitative and quantitative data, and we'll talk more about what those terms mean if you're not familiar with them. We'll talk about how you present our information, how you write a report, and what kinds of conclusions you can draw from your research and what kinds of conclusions you can't draw. And once again, using your critical thinking skills as you develop your tools, you design your study, you ask your questions, and you present your findings. So that's a summary of Chapter 1. We will move on next week into Chapter 2.